Hello everyone, this is the first video in a series of videos designed for Year 10 and 11 students studying Frankenstein. If you're in Year 10, we're going to be setting these as home learning for you to complete, and if you're in Year 11, we'll be using these as the basis of revision to help you when it comes to revising the text, looking at kind of key themes and key quotations there from Frankenstein. When we're going through these, you're going to need probably a pen or a pencil to hand. As you can probably tell, there's not really a lot of space in Frankenstein to write around the text, so you might want to use post-it notes as well. Just obviously be careful when you're sticking them in because they might fall out. For this session, we're not going to be doing some annotation of the text. We're going to be looking instead at the introduction, so you might want to get yourself a bit of paper. I'm going to break this into 3 separate videos to start. We're going to look at background and themes, we're going to look at narrative form, and we're going to look at Frankenstein and revolution. So there's 3 separate bits to this session as well. You might want to have a highlighter as well. As you can see, my highlighter is starting to go through the pages, which might be a problem. So you might want to use kind of a coloured pencil maybe, or something else which is a bit easier to make these things stand out. So we're looking at Frankenstein here. Obviously there's a lot of information here, and this is what we're going to cover in this first video here. The introduction to the novel covers, first of all, background and themes, and as I'm going through these, I'm going to show you what I've highlighted and why that's interesting, and you might just want to kind of make a note of that on your piece of paper. Frankenstein, the creature in Frankenstein, has become a metaphor for our own cultural crises. Basically, this idea that the creature almost represents any time we are faced with a social or political problem in the world. People talk about, people's monstrous behaviour, and going through history, the creature becomes a metaphor for that. So if, for instance, we've got a situation where people are behaving in a kind of a violent or aggressive way, the creature almost represents that. If we're worried about other people kind of coming to our country, the creature comes to represent that because of kind of what he's made of. And so when we have all these cultural crises, this is what that creature represents. Then we're kind of going on here. There's a little bit of information. The key thing, first of all, Frankenstein is not a simple battle between good and evil. It's never the case, as you know, that both Victor and the creature are kind of good or evil. It's not a ghost story, not really a gothic novel. It defies a single interpretation, engaging instead with some of the crucial social and public questions of the period. If you're trying to pigeonhole Frankenstein into being a text about this, you're missing all the various different things that happen there. It's important to note at this stage that Frankenstein is studied at GCSE, A-level and university. I've studied it at both A-level and university, and obviously there's a lot more scope to explore some of these interpretations, but at GCSE it means it's great when you're discussing some of these kind of wider ideas and context, and also quotations. So Mary Shelley's life here. There's an excellent film on Netflix about Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley's mother died 10 days after her birth in 1797. She had a difficult relationship with her father, William Godwin, after the death of her mother, and she eloped with Percy Shelley at the age of 16. Percy Shelley, as William Godwin did, had some quite radical views on marriage, and basically there was also the elopement of Mary's half-sister Claire Claremont, who became Shelley's mistress. So Mary Shelley elopes with Percy Shelley, but she is kind of being cheated on by Percy with her half-sister there. So it's not perhaps the rosy kind of family image there. Mary gave birth to a daughter in 1815, and bear in mind Frankenstein was first written in 1818, and then this edition that we study was reissued in 1831. The child's death within 2 weeks of its birth has been perceived by some critics as crucial in understanding Frankenstein. Think about it, an absent mother figure. Both Victor's mother dies early on in the novel, the creature has no mother, and you've got kind of this idea of, young Mary falling madly in love with Percy Shelley, as I suppose Elizabeth does with Victor, and obviously the death of, kind of Mary Shelley's child 2 weeks within its birth. These are all important things to Frankenstein, but it's not a semi-autobiographical novel. It's not just about Mary Shelley's life, although what you can see, at GCSE, there are a lot of these things in there which kind of explain why Mary Shelley did certain things, and it's important to understand that it's connected to a range of philosophical and political ideas of the time. We're going to look at the scientific and philosophical now. As you know, you've seen the kind of videos that we've studied where you've got Galvani's experiment of animal electricity, where he basically puts the electric current through the dead frog and its legs start to twitch. And scientists at the time, we're talking about the 1700s and early 1800s, were starting to believe they could take the creative and regenerative powers of nature, harness those powers and restore life. Now, obviously, we know that you can't do that now. We know that you can't bring someone back who is dead, but because they were at the stage where they were starting to experiment with electricity, and obviously passing an electric current through a corpse, as happened in kind of Mary Shelley's lifetime, and seeing that corpse twitch, they thought they weren't a million miles away from creating life. And because of that, some scientists thought they had really strong powers. Humphrey Davy, for instance, argued that the chemist had the power to interfere in the natural world to change and modify it. So you're starting to see that Davy is almost like Frankenstein here. Scientists are starting to think that they have the power to do whatever they want with regards to nature. And if you think about society back in Mary Shelley's day as being mainly a God-fearing society, the average kind of British person back then would be shocked by the amount of power and the ability to abuse the power that scientists has, as Victor does. It's rooted in authentic scientific ideas and concerns of the period as well. And the novel implicitly approves the non-interventionist approach of Charles Darwin. So Charles Darwin basically argues that it's the idea of the origin of the species and survival of the fittest, and if a species dies out, for instance, that's because it wasn't meant to survive. It's not for us as humans to interfere. And if you do interfere, there are dire consequences, particularly for a science that sees itself as master. So because Victor interferes, because Victor gets involved in science, there are dire consequences for that, and he is punished through the death of everyone he holds dear. And also there's the question as to whether life was an intangible essence or simply the sum of a collection of biological and physiological functions. Basically, is this idea, as we see in kind of Star Wars, the Force flows through all of us, or even, things like the circle of life in The Lion King, is life this hidden kind of energy and force that we've got, some intangible essence? Or are we just people who go about, we have our dinner, we go to sleep, we go to the toilet, we reproduce, we do that again and again and again and again. And if you think about that in the novel, the creature's joy at seeing kind of nature and the natural world, and compare that with Victor Frankenstein when he spends most of his life just tucked up in his laboratory studying and studying and studying and studying. It's quite an interesting point there about that. So they're the two main scientific concerns. And on the back of that, what Mary Shelley picks up on is there's a masculinity of scientific thought. All the people we've seen on the previous page are white men, white male scientists. And this idea that, the scientists, as a result of that, they perhaps don't take full responsibility in the aftermath of their experiments. This has been a concern in modern science, particularly with kind of animal testing. Often animals are used in laboratories for testing purposes and then killed afterwards, and people don't kind of think, well, could we rehome those animals? Could we look after those animals? They're not taking responsibility for those scientific discoveries. The attempt by Victor's masculine science to appropriate the quintessential feminine act of childbirth, basically, because Victor tries to create a human being and succeeds, and this is generally exclusively biologically a feminine act. Women give birth to children in nature, must eventually fail because he never thinks about what he will do with the creation once it's alive. So this idea that Victor doesn't really care about the creature once it's born, he just wants the thrill of creating, and he wants to create people who are entirely subservient to him and follow him. And because he is a man, that's why it was never going to succeed. And if Victor Frankenstein or Elizabeth, let's say, had actually created the creature, Mary Shelley's argument, or the argument here, is that she would have cared for it a lot more. But also, further to this, women in the novel are kind of punished for their association to men. So Justine Moritz is executed as a result of Victor's actions, and then his cowardice in refusing to tell the truth. He doesn't take responsibility, even for a secondary thing related to it. Elizabeth Lavenza's relationship with Victor is sacrificed as he pursues his obsession of kind of killing the creature, well, creating the creature in their childhood, then trying to kill the creature, then creating the female creature, then kind of he vows revenge on the creature. And Elizabeth's is just in the background there, kind of waiting for this man to finally stop what he's doing and kind of devote himself to her. And it never happens until she literally becomes a sacrifice to his ambitions. Whether that might be quite difficult to follow, I guess, but it's interesting to think about how women are treated in the novel. And again, you might not be able to get it into a GCSE essay, But what Victor certainly does is he fails as a parent. The creature is his child. I know some people find this difficult to follow, but you get rewarded for this in the Mark scheme by considering creature as a child and Victor as his parent, and he fails completely to love and educate it. The creature is like a newborn baby when abandoned, completely helpless and ignorant. He's forced to discover his own basic needs and teach himself the skills necessary for his survival. He also learns that his hideous appearance will make him despised and rejected, in spite of his benevolent disposition and longing for human companionship. The creature is a good person. He has to teach himself everything to survive. And I know that's a bit far-fetched. Remember, we suspend our disbelief with Frankenstein. But this idea that he knows that he's hideous, he knows that he doesn't look appealing to kind of people, and he'll be despised as a result of that. And there's no father, there's no parent to look after him, to say, look, it's going to be okay, don't worry, I will look after you. And furthermore to this, his isolation from humanity is marked by his namelessness and by the epithets which dehumanise him: wretch, demon and monster. 3 great quotations to use for Frankenstein. Victor Frankenstein calls himself a wretch at certain points, but it's in self-pity. He calls the creature a wretch, and this idea of the use of wretch, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you label someone with these terms, they will become those terms, and that's exactly what happens to the creature as it goes on. And thinking about Paradise Lost, and I know Year 10 you've done a lesson on this, his reading registers the terrible recognition that his humanity is unneeded, and that, like Milton's Satan, he is seen evil, even though he's also tragically isolated and suffering. The creature murders 3 people in Frankenstein, and he's responsible for more deaths. And it's this idea that we actually, it's black and white, we call him evil because of those actions, and we're right to do that. But we don't accept the society that he's isolated and suffering. We don't accept that there are factors that have led to this. I'm not saying that criminally, that should forgive what the creature does. It certainly doesn't. But we need to consider why people do things as well. A couple of theories here. I know some people do these in sociology. These are great for Frankenstein. Locke suggested that humanity was neither good nor evil, but a tabula rasa on which the experience would write. So basically, when we are born, and we're neither good nor evil, and our environments, our nurture puts everything into us. If you've had a difficult upbringing like the creature does, then you will, in theory, become potentially an evil kind of person. And if you think about Victor, if you've had an overindulged childhood, you'll become a spoiled adult, if that makes sense. Jean-Jacques Rousseau put forward the idea of the natural man who is constricted and corrupted by society. And think about the creature when he first exists. He flees to nature, and then it's only when he comes into contact with society, represented by mankind in the novel, that he becomes corrupted and he becomes evil. And Victor manufactures his creature, but then literally creates him as a monster by his rejection, by labelling him as a monster and a wretch and rejecting him. And even Victor agrees to make a female companion. He cannot be unmoved by the creature's story. But again, he abandons his responsibilities to the creature by refusing to complete the female, and then destroying what he has done in front of the creature's eyes. It's a little bit like me saying I'm gonna get my daughter a phone for Christmas, and then it gets to Christmas Eve, and I destroy the phone in front of her. It's that kind of, don't say you're going to do it if you're not going to follow through there. And it's doubly cruel what Victor does to the creature. And it's all because Frankenstein is afraid that the creature is going to somehow reproduce and take over the world. And that comes from Frankenstein's own selfishness, his own egotistical nature, because he wants a new species. He doesn't just want one creature, he wants a whole species of creatures to bless him. He wants to be God to these creatures. And because he thinks the creature is going to procreate, which the creature doesn't say he's going to, the creature says, look, I just want a companion, I just want a friend in the world. Because he thinks this is going to happen, Victor then, is kind of led by his self-aggrandisement, his egotistic nature, and he thinks that the creature, right, well, you're going to do this, I think you're going to do this, so you're going to do this. And it's also the same self-obsession which has encouraged Victor to believe that creatures concerning his wedding night must be directed at Victor when the reader guesses the target's Elizabeth. This lovely moment, horrific moment of dramatic irony in the novel, where we know that Elizabeth is the one that's going to be killed, but Victor, because of his selfishness, his egotistical nature, completely oblivious to this. And this is Victor's hamartia, his tragic flaw in Frankenstein. Mary Shelley deliberately makes him so egotistical and so selfish, like those scientists who thought they could play at God, to show the kind of tragic effects that are going to happen for them not taking responsibility for their actions. The creature, on the other hand, he also has this feeling of pain, anguish and desert. and remorse when his father dies, when Victor dies. But Victor, right to the end, he learns little from the suffering he's caused. You know, he's right at the end of the novel, he's telling Walton's men, "I'll carry on to the North Pole, even though you'll die in search of glory." So that's the end of this short video. In the next video, we're going to look at narrative form, and we'll go on to look at Frankenstein and revolution as well. So just make sure you've kind of highlighted those key things in the novel and made a couple of notes as well. And we're going to look at narrative form next.